What else about Furiosa? What thrilled you? What didn't work for you?
I kind of want to talk a little bit about the climax of the film, the last scene between Dementis and Furiosa, because it takes on like this much more literary, much more verbose kind of denouement of like any of these movies before, really, and gives like basically like makes flesh a lot of the ideas that are floating around in the like exhaust fumes of all of these movies.
There it is. Thank you.
But is like both a interesting statement about like Dementis' psychology, but I think in a way like George Miller's. Now, I may now have at this point over-indexed for no matter what, when a great filmmaker makes a movie, there is going to be an essay about his own filmmaking in the movie. When we've been doing it with Mank, and we do it with Fablemans, and we'll do it with Megalopolis and all this stuff. But I couldn't help but feel like when he's just like, I'm basically out here in the desert just trying to feel something, you know, if I'm paraphrasing Dementis, that it sounded a lot like George Miller. Like, it's just like, what do you do when you make Fury Road? How the fuck do you top that? How do you find the thing?
It's not 3,000 Years of Longing.
Yeah, it's probably not that.
Well, you mentioned that movie at the top, and that movie does feel very much in conversation with this movie too, though, because that is
like chapters.
Yeah, the way that it's organized, but also this idea of like kind of stories we tell ourselves to live. You know, like that is kind of what these movies and what his work and what his big ideas are about. Is we create these mythologies and then we constantly are trying to live up to them. And so like even a character like Dementis is like, the only way I can get through my day and avoid my own, you know, inimitable grief is to seek something greater than myself.
Yeah.
And my version of that is power, death, destruction at all costs.
Yeah.
And you have to tell yourself this the same way that like the Tilda Swinton character has kind of vanished into like her own imagination because there's things that she doesn't want to deal with in the real world. And George Miller, who, you know, famously was a medical doctor before he was a filmmaker, who witnessed like some real pain and trauma, some really ugly things, and who brings that sense of like the physical, the painful physical into every movie that he makes. I just rewatched Lorenzo's Oil this weekend. Holy shit, what like a difficult movie to watch that is. And that, you know, he's like, to get through this, to make myself feel whole, I have to tell these stories.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that he put those words into a character's mouth in that way in this movie.
Yeah, and if you take Dementis as a stand-in for populist right-wing leaders at this moment, and the whole thing about like the difference between hope and hate, I think that was a pretty. It was like a unexpectedly profound moment at the end of a movie that is so hard charging and physical.
Yeah. I think what's so special about the Mad Max franchise in general is this idea that like George Miller has had control over it the whole time. How rare that is. It's not just like a Warner Brothers property. It's like George Miller has had this from, you know, scrappily fundraising to make it in the first place. My favorite bit of trivia about the Mad Max franchise is that I think the only reason he has the rights is because he got fired off of Contact. Jodie Foster ran her mouth in an interview and he sued the studio, and he got the rights to Mad Max as part of the settlement. So I was like, thank you, Jodie Foster, for Fury Road.
Such a fascinating turn.
It's incredible.
I do want to see George Miller's Contact, for the record. That is something I'm interested in.
Absolutely. Is it all Jake Busey? Like,
probably.
It's
Praetorian Jake.
Praetorian Jake. Love that. The teeth will play. Okay, so so it's his story. So it's we're meeting this filmmaker wherever he is in his life and what's on his mind at that time. And you hear the stories about Thunderdome and the fact that he had to like basically half quit that movie because he lost Byron Kennedy, his producing partner, tragically in a helicopter accident. And so like a man who has been grieving, and a man who has taught himself how to make film, and a man who has gone through the industry and made Babe Big in the City and like all these other things, is we getting to watch like, what does it mean then to make a film after you've made Fury Road?
Yeah.
And that's where we are meeting him in his filmography. And I don't think there's another franchise that does that for a filmmaker. Like, I don't think we have another piece of IP that.
Yeah, it's not like Jurassic Park. It's not like a lot of these films where it's just like, this really is this blockbuster personal expression.
Yeah.
Did you watch any of George Lucas's remarks at the Cannes Award acceptance that he had?
No.
Where he was like, I hate franchises and stuff?
I sensed a touch of melancholy, I would say,
He's not
in his
amped
tone.
for The Acolyte?
Well, he didn't mention that title in particular,
Okay.
but I don't know. It's hard to say with those guys who've had this extraordinary success, who are legendary in their field of work, but who have like birthed something that feels very much like out of their control.
Yeah.
So Miller is an interesting way to frame him as somebody who is ostensibly still in control of the thing that launched him into the world of creativity, really. And now I wonder, like, does he give a shit that the movie didn't perform at the box office? Does he think? I have to assume he thinks about that.
I think probably only in as much as it might prevent him from making another. I
Yeah,
think that's the only
yeah.
reason. But like the way in which he hasn't fit into studio filmmaking or the film industry time and time again and has been like fired or called difficult or, as Jodie Foster called him, naive or whatever it is, like that he is something very singular. And
Mhm.
a lot of his movies, like the Mad Max movies, certainly before, I think Fury Road is perfect and dead. But the Mad Max movies, or like Witches of Eastwick, a movie that I love, but don't really love watching, but love remembering. Does that make any sense?
It's a
about Witches of
great way to
East-
put it. There's like a little bit of an off-kilter nature to all of his movies. I
Yeah.
watched Happy Feet for the first time with my daughter this weekend. Gotta tell you something, she didn't like it.
Oh.
She really had a hard time locking into those penguins.
Oh, no.
Did you take her to Furiosa though?
I did. She sat front row, and she is now wearing the grease on
She's
her forehead.
deaf.
Yeah. No, I think it's because he has obviously a left of center sensibility in terms of the way that he tells stories, and that movie is kind of an experiment. And then it became this weird freak breakout hit, kind of similar to Babe. It's a
yeah.
movie that was kind of an experiment and then became this weird breakout Oscar nominee and made a lot of money. And then there was a sequel, and there was also a sequel to Happy Feet in the same way. And so he's like able to simultaneously be idiosyncratic and also reach audiences in a unique way. His other movies that are kind of non-franchise oriented, ultimately, Witches of Eastwick and Lorenzo's Oil, are very odd. And I agree, like kind of odd to revisit, but are kind of like great YouTube movies where they have
Yeah.
great scenes.
Like the cherry pit vomiting scene in Witches of Eastwick will stay with me for the rest of my life. Like there are just moments in Witches of Eastwick that are some of the best things I've ever seen. And I think I will just wind up thinking about Furiosa the same way, where I will just remember the parts of it that worked really well and gloss over the parts that didn't. I don't know if it's going to be one that I will rewatch the way that I've rewatched Fury Road or Road Warrior again and again. But I think it's a movie that I will think of more fondly as time goes on because I will just remember the war rig fight or the motorcycle chase or whatever and not think about her in the cage for however long she's in the cage or whatever, you know?